Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of ancient warfare-related ranting, where I attempt to answer a question from a reader, viewer, or listener. You can ask a question. You can back us on Patreon, one of three different levels, Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. You can send us an email, send me a postcard. You can comment on a previous video or podcast. Now, today's question is from Samuel Murray. Excellent surname there, Samuel. Thanks for the recent AWA episodes. My pleasure. Just finishing off issue 101, which gives us a bit of a date because we're up to at least 106. Particularly enjoyed the article on the Peloponnesian Aspis band decorations. Possible AWA question. Well, not possible. Probable, in fact, real. Here we go. Thucydides, Book 1, outlines Athenian forces at the outset of the Peloponnesian War in 431 BC, a passage which I've recently covered with my A-level ancient history class. Lots of Athenian archers mentioned. Do we know how they were equipped? Whether they were citizens or Scythians? Did they serve aboard triremes or in garrisons? Presumably they were poorer citizens who couldn't afford the hoplite panoply or specialist mercenaries. How would this have affected their status in the army and wider society? Okay. Woohoo! Athenian archers. Very interesting. And of course, when you talk about Greek archers, you're always up against the idea that the attitude towards archery by Greek societies was negative, that archery was cowardly, that archers were unnecessary. And, in a lot of our battle narratives, we get hoplites and no one else mentioned. The reality, of course, is that archers are quite common in Greek armies, that most of them have them. Certainly early on, are they included when we talk about psiloi, the light armed troops? And archers are not specified, but they're certainly present. And lots of archaeological sites find archery, normally arrowheads. So the archery is certainly there. It's certainly used in hunting. And so there are people who would be hoplites and more who are skilled in archery because it's a necessity for hunting. When it comes to warfare, we get much less mention of archery. Of course, we get archery in the Homeric poems, even though there also it's abused on occasion. But there's several archers who are very skilled, most famous Odysseus, but others as well. What we find, of course, in historical ancient warfare is that archery is also present. Now, when it comes to the Athenians, one of the fascinating things about Athenian military history is that there are four corps of Athenian military personnel. And the peculiar thing about them is that you have the hoplites, the cavalry, the navy, and the archers. And the archers of all those four is the one that's neglected almost exclusively. No one talks about the archers. David Pritchard from the University of Queensland's written an article in Greece and Rome on the archers of classical Athens. I disagree with some of them. He interprets the Athenian Hippaeus at the Battle of Plataea as being archers, which I don't agree with. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get to. But it seems as though the archer corps, which is specified as a particular corps of men used for that purpose in Athens, begins in the 480s. So it's got a pedigree. And by the time of Thucydides in 431, he talks about there being 1,600 archers in that corps. So it's a big number, all right? Now, we've got other mentions of archers we find, again, in around the time of the Battle of Plataea. The Spartan regent Pausanias asks for archers to be sent rather than, and they're specified as archers. So where are we? It is in book 9. Can I find my reference? Men of Athens. This is Pausanias talking in chapter 60. Please send us help. And essentially he asks for archers. Chapter 49, archers, mounted archers as well, which is interesting. So you get these sort of mentions of them. Chapter 60, do us the service of sending us your archers. Bam. Okay. So they exist early on. They are then brought up in various different occasions. The other thing that's happening in Athenian archery, of course, as you mentioned, is the 300 Scythians. Now, these are public slaves who act as a police force. They are separate from the archer corps. And we see this in Greek pottery. The Scythians, which seem to be organized around the same time in the 480s, 300 in number. Sometimes the number is said to be 1,000. Now, the reason I think that Pritchard thinks that the Hippace, the Scythian, or the archers, is the number 300. Now, the interesting thing about them is, of course, that they're depicted in pottery in Scythian dress, but later they may still be called the Scythians. They still may dress as Scythians, but they might not ethnically have been Scythians. They may have been metics, or they may even have been citizens, poorer citizens. The problem with poorer citizens is it doesn't seem as though it's something for being poor, because if you're a poor citizen of Athens, there are better chances for more pay. You get paid more if you're a member of the Navy than if you're an archer. Why would you be an archer if you can get more money as a rower, for instance? You bring up the idea of, in your question, you bring up the idea of these archers working on ships. And indeed, every Greek trireme in the Athenian Navy has 4 archers. So not many, to be honest. 4 archers per ship is not many. Normally 10 hoplites and 4 archers per ship. Of course, when you have hundreds of ships, those numbers of archers start to go up. And, at the Battle of Sphacteria, they all come off the ships, arm themselves however they can, and then they fight against the Spartans. And as far as I know, the archers are not specifically mentioned in Sphacteria, but they would have been there. So that's a really interesting sort of issue as well. 800 archers are sent to Pylos, for instance. So we've got also, and this is where we've got an issue of source material, you've also got mercenary archers. And mercenary archers mentioned in the Messenian War, but we tend to reject that as too early for mercenaries, although again the idea that the sea peoples might be Greek mercenaries brings up, well, they could easily be mercenaries at that time. And the main source of archers, mercenary archers in ancient Greece, is Crete. Now, we find Cretan archers mentioned a lot in source material, even Cretans, without saying that they're archers, and then it turns out that they're archers. And even archers without mentioning that they're Cretans, and it turns out that they're Cretans, men from Crete. And they're men from different particular cities in Crete who are contracted in a really interesting manner, because the contracts that they have with their client is what we call a simachoi relationship. So therefore, they're a city in Greece, for instance, Gortyn, contracts to provide 200 archers to an employer city for a particular length of time, for a year. And the interesting thing about that is that if there are casualties in that archer unit, it's the responsibility of Gortyn to bring the numbers up to 200, not the responsibility of the employer to hire more. The idea is, no, we'll pay you for 200 archers for 2 years or a year. You give us 200 archers. Oh, we just lost 73 of them. It's the responsibility of Gortyn to find 73 more to replace those casualties. Interesting. And so you get Cretan archers. Now, again, the idea, Herodotus explicitly states that the Cretans sent no help to the Greeks during the Persian Wars. That's contradicted by Ctesias, who says that Crete does send archers for the Battle of Salamis. And certainly later, and for instance, in Thucydides, you get Cretan archers being mentioned explicitly going to the Sicilian expedition, for instance. So there's Cretans everywhere as mercenary archers for lots of other Greek cities, even to the point that they're fighting against other Cretan archers. And what we think is happening there is the sort of incessant civil wars between cities on Crete is enacted in mainland Greece by the cities on Crete hiring their archers out to rival cities on mainland Greece. And so therefore Gortyn can be fighting against Knossos on mainland Greece with its archers. Anyway, that's sort of beyond Athenian archers. But you've got all of that happening in Athenian archery. And so the particular and peculiar thing about it is that it's this neglected form of Athenian and Greek warfare, and they are a very present form. There's archers for each trireme. They're probably also being used in other expeditions. You get 800 of them being sent to Pylos. That's half the 1,600 mentioned by Pericles in Book 1. And so they're probably being deployed as units for other campaigns as well. We don't know about them being specifically deployed in garrisons. And the catalogue of hoplites, for instance, there's probably a similar arrangement for, right, we're going to send this many archers off to this area, and then they draw from the list of the catalogue of all the names of eligible archers, that number of names, and those men are then sent. That's probably what's happening. So I hope, Samuel, that answers your question, and you can join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.